Good morning, buenos dias, bom dia. Welcome everyone to today's webinar. As Nadine said, hosted in collaboration with Invest Northern Ireland, and I'd like to thank our colleagues at Invest Northern Ireland, Canning House, and the British and Columbia Chamber of Commerce and the Caribbean Council for joining us today and being so overwhelmingly proactive and positive about joining us. As you may know, we were meant to come over back in March to come and see you face to face. However, as world events kind of changed, then we're here doing this online. So it's fantastic that we're able to carry this out, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to speak with you all this morning. So for today, what I'm going to speak about is here we go. I'm just going to give you an overview of Latin America and the Caribbean, introduce you to DIT and what we do, give you some ideas of some of the opportunities and overview of what's happening with COVID, and then finally close with some of my top 5 tips for business culture and ways to keep in touch. So I think kind of what's my background really, and who am I? So business specialist Latin America and the Caribbean. Well, what does that really mean? Well, I am part of the Latin America and Caribbean trade teams that work in the British embassies overseas in Latin America and the Caribbean. Yeah, I'm based here in the UK, in Leeds actually. So my role, my remit is to encourage UK businesses to start thinking about exporting or working in Latin America, or to expand their operations. My background is that I worked for a British company. I've come from the private sector to DIT, and I worked for a British company, a scholarly publishing house in fact, for over 10 years, and for a significant, probably 8 years of that time, I was focused on working in Latin America and the Caribbean. And then within that, I spent 3.5 years living in Panama, being directly on territory, out there working for a British business. I'm a Spanish and Portuguese speaker, and I did Spanish at university, and I think that's incredibly important, and that really fostered my love, appreciation and enjoyment and real desire for other businesses and UK to exceed and to excel in and see the possibilities that are in the fantastic and dynamic region that is Latin America and the Caribbean. So, but who are DIT? You may be familiar with Invest Northern Ireland, and they are a body that we work with quite closely. So Department for International Trade is a government department, and we cover all countries and all regions across the world. As I said, I'm focused on the Latin American Caribbean team, and primarily Department for International Trade, or DIT as we are known, has 3 functions, and that's really to offer assistance to companies interested in exporting and growing internationally, and that's really where my role sits, to support international companies expand into the UK, and also to work on international trade agreements. And you can see that across DIT, we have a basis in 19 markets with 140 staff based there. So we have ample coverage, and we are based on the ground there, with me based here in the UK. So, yeah. So just to give you a bit of an overview of Latin America and the Caribbean. So Latin America and the Caribbean, it covers, it's enormous, and I think, you know, this is a very important point to understand. It covers from the very top of Mexico, so Tijuana, right down to Tierra del Fuego in southern Argentina, and it's enormous. Brazil is the size of Europe alone. But I think it's very important that we remember that this is 33 different countries and the home of 650 million people, and some of the most urbanized in the world, with megacities such as Sao Paulo and Mexico City. And I think, you know, I read a statistic last week that Sao Paulo, Mexico City, the sum of those totals are going to overtake the population of Spain in the future. And with 650 million people and overwhelmingly a very young demographic, there is a huge potential there, and a growing middle class. And I think if we take Northern Irish and British products, roughly, if we're talking maybe that they'll appeal to say 20% of those populations, then we're still talking about significant appetite and a considerable consumer base. And here I'd like to share with you as well this graphic from the OECD. And yes, this is pre-COVID, but what you may not have realised is that actually after the EU, the USA, China, Latin America and the Caribbean is the fourth biggest market globally. So if you're not trading there, then I think that then why not? And this is hopefully why you're here today, to think about how to start doing that. And if you're already in India, South Africa, Vietnam and Indonesia, well, guess what? Chile, Peru, Colombia and Mexico are all ranked as easier than doing business in those countries. So if you've done it there, then you can absolutely succeed in Latin America and the Caribbean, with Argentina, Brazil and Mexico being part of the G20 group, and pretty much all of the Latin American countries being part of the World Trade Organization. I mentioned languages, and I think languages is very important. This is primarily a Spanish and Portuguese, of course, in Brazil speaking market. And if you are going to enter into that market, at least having bilingual business cards, materials in local language would be very, very important. And if you go into expand, thinking about local staff and distributors, or even staff that are able to speak languages, is key. And particularly if you're going to enter into Brazil, then having materials that are in Brazilian Portuguese is of the utmost importance as well, because people will notice the difference. So, but really, kind of again, why we're here is that in 2017, kind of less than 1% of Latin American imports and goods were from the UK. So we need to be doing better, and we need to be doing more. China and the US are of course very important, but the French, the Dutch, the Germans, and the Spanish are of course very strong in Latin America and the Caribbean, and there's absolutely more that we can do. We were there historically, we built railroads, we helped with infrastructure in the past, and we're now in a position that we are more agile and independent, that we can take that forward than ever before. So of course, COVID-19 in Latin America, I think, we've all seen the headlines, and we know that at the moment Brazil is the second most worst hit country in the world, with the most record number of cases. And I think there's absolutely nothing that we cannot ignore this is a global health pandemic. A lot of the countries have been in severe lockdown. My colleagues based in Buenos Aires have been locked down for, I think it's 180 days now, so significant. And these have been harsher lockdowns that we've seen. You can't go outside. In Chile, my colleagues have had to have a police permit to leave the house, to say where they've been. Peru has been very strict, whereas Mexico has been open a bit more. And for example, the Caribbean islands, although have had quite strict lockdown, have had low numbers. Yet, of course, because they are very dependent on tourism, have been massively affected by the closing of the doors and hardly anybody traveling. So I've highlighted here a couple of reports. And normally, reports that are published, within April, May time, we would consider as still being quite recent in economic terms. Nowadays and in this context, may seem a little out of date. However, if you are interested, there's some excellent resources here for you to consult. However, what are we thinking? What are we seeing on the ground in DIT? Well, certainly we're seeing that governments are pushing ahead with infrastructure projects to create jobs across the region. Does that sound familiar? I think it's something that we're doing here as well with Build Back Better and also Build Back Greener. And that's something that is encompassing across all of the region. Whether, as I've said, that's more the thinking about climate change in the Caribbean. In Brazil and Mexico, this might be more on a state or a federal level. And whereas in Chile and Peru, we're looking at national programs. And in fact, in Peru, you may have seen the recent news about the government-to-government agreement that was recently signed between the Peruvian government and the UK government to build hospitals and schools in the north of Peru following the El Nino phenomenon. If you're in the defence and security sector, there may be some slower in spending here, but particularly security in the private sector, we're seeing as that there could be some opportunities here. Also, as well, digital security and cyber security. We've seen, that that Latin America has had to move to digital at a pace that has not been precedented before. I think I think for the first time ever, Mercado Libre, which is an online marketplace and a Latin American online marketplace, overtook Vale, the Brazilian mining firm, for the first time ever. So we've seen a response to this. However, it is starting from a low base, so we have seen that consumer habits have changed. Some of the other things that are important to think about is that development bank spending is going to be very important in a way that maybe here in Europe and in the UK we won't have seen, and they'll be crucial to helping build back the economies. And of course, in these economies, there are large percentages, up to 60% in Peru, I think it was, of informal economies. So people, there has been a huge need and response to think about how we react to COVID in a social manner as well, and to support a broader base of the population. But we do see, and we're unsure at the moment whether it's going to be a U or a W recovery, be it as we imagine things will go back in and out of lockdown. But as China and the US open up, then certainly Latin America will be responding to that. We may see some more protectionism. But at the moment, if we can prove how we fit within that supply chain, and how your products, how your services are unique and can only fulfill that gap, then I'm confident that we will be able to overcome that. And indeed, with trade agreements within DIT, we are covering quite holistically the Latin America and the Caribbean as a region, and that is with the Andean region, which covers Peru, Colombia, and Ecuador, whether that's the Central American Agreement, and also the CARICOM Agreement. So it's quite a comprehensive coverage of the region, and of course Chile as well. So, however, as we've seen, with the pandemic, and they have also opened up other possibilities. So what we did here within our teams, kind of around May, June time, when after all the repatriation flights had taken place, we sat down with our sector and our country directors and analysed where we were and where we saw the opportunities to be, and the possibilities for Northern Irish businesses in Latin America and in the Caribbean. So this chart that I'm sharing with you now is taking into account the situation of COVID. And as we can see, as we look down, that life sciences is particularly very, very, very strong, as of course this is affecting most markets. Infrastructure, I've already mentioned. Financial and professional services, particularly kind of on the fintech side, and supporting that green growth. Agriculture and agri-tech is a massive area that we've seen as major importance, looking at food security, but also with markets that we think may be more protectionist, if however there are items that are absolutely fundamental to help to support and increase their yields, support growth, then absolutely. And I understand that Northern Ireland has a strength in these areas, can fundamentally add value. Then this is where you can assert as I said, assert your value. And this is all underpinned by tech and digital. And I think that this is very important. When we discussed this with our country directors of the sectors, it was every discussion was about how tech was involved, whether that's retail and the e-commerce I was discussing, security and the cyber, education, ed tech, auto and advanced engineering, whether that's the parts and the supply chain, agri-tech I've mentioned, life sciences, telemedicine, financial service and professional services, fintech. So any digital aspects that you can show and to help ease systems, ease processes, will be of incredible value to Latin America and the Caribbean, and is something that Northern Ireland has a strength in. So just as we think about, so that's kind of hopefully given you an overview of where of the region, if the geographic side, also kind of an update with kind of and a forward look for COVID-19. But something very important to consider when you're doing business in Latin America is the culture. So I would say that these are my 5 top tips, and there are many more that you can think about. And these are purely my observations as a Brit and a Spanish speaker working in Latin America and the Caribbean. So focusing on my top 5, I think I would definitely consider making an appointment, and this is when we can go and travel again, because face-to-face is incredibly important. However, with a recent move to digital, people are definitely more open into maybe having those initial discussions online in maybe a way that they weren't before. So if you're thinking about travel, you might want to kind of float the idea about 6 weeks before, then making your appointment 3 weeks in advance, but you absolutely must confirm a week beforehand. And confirming over the phone is particularly important. People do use email, however, you're much more likely to kind of read and understand where people stand if you pick up the phone and confirm, because it may be that there's been, a change of venue, that somebody else is joining, and that's more likely to come up when it's over the phone. And this kind of refers into my second point, which is that flexibility is absolutely fundamental. Things change at the last minute, schedules change, different documents may need signing that you thought. You might need to go meet someone in a different place. Other criteria that you weren't sure about might need to be included. So this is absolutely fundamental. But what's great is if things on our side don't necessarily go to plan, I would say that people in Latin America, understand that, and because that flexibility works both ways. So I highly recommend, if you are working in Latin America, you will be there will be that expectation, that you're as a Northern European, that you'll be a bit more on time, maybe a bit more reserved. But certainly, if you can be flexible too, then things will run a lot smoothly, and you'll enjoy your business a lot more. You won't feel as stressed. You'll be able to account for that. And part of this flexibility is as well leaving room to negotiate, to haggle over this, to maybe think about price. This is a very, very price sensitive market. So, people watch the dollar very, very closely, because foreign exchange rates are massively affected by this. But whether that's the real in Brazil to the colon in Costa Rica, the rate against the local currency against the dollar is important. And whatever you do finalize and agree your proposal, your deal in writing. That is very, very important, and there will be quite a lot of paperwork. So be prepared for that. So take that into account. Things might need several signatures, something might need a stamp, you might be sent to a notary, something might need to be translated. So do kind of build that time and factor in that you will need to do that. I would definitely as well, in your meetings, kind of urge on the side of formal, certainly formal dress. People are very well turned out and well presented. If you're in Brazil, as women, you must always have your nails painted, and as a man, your hands well manicured and well looked after. That is a sign that people look at. And also kind of in your meetings, they may be more formal. Depending on where you are in Latin America, you may use a polite form of Spanish straight away. You may use people's titles. So, for example, doctor or licenciado. So, be aware of that, and also that it's most likely that you will meet and start off with liaising with the director or the head of the company, and then kind of as your business progresses, and as they kind of suss you out, really, you'll then kind of deal with more people who may be able to help you kind of realize some of the day-to-day elements. But certainly kind of urging on the side of formal, and then kind of going in and traditional maybe is important. However, on the other hand, people want to and will develop personal relationships with you, as people prefer to do business with those that they know and trust. So on the one hand, the meeting might seem quite formal. You might be in a very formal room. You'll be in your suit and tie. You may be using some of your formal greetings, but then they may be asking you about your family and what you've done whilst you've been in the country. Have you had a certain food? Have you enjoyed this? So kind of getting that balance right is important, but that you're able to, and you're happy to speak about your family, what you've done. People may show you pictures. You may end up speaking more over WhatsApp and Facebook. So those personal relationships are important, and that generates a sense of loyalty and longevity. And certainly, in my experience and those of my peers that I've spoken to, kind of once you're in Latin America and Caribbean and well established, then this is a relationship that you have for a long, long time. So building on this and investing in it now, and that relationship is incredibly important. And I think something else to bear in mind, and there's kind of nuances and why it's always important to pick up the phone and call and suss out, is people don't like to say a direct no. And for me as a Brit, I found this quite challenging, because I wanted to know whether people were interested in writing for us, subscribing, using our service or product. And people don't want to be rude, and don't want, and it's seen as rude to say no. So people may kind of go say that they're very interested, and then it kind of peters off, or people may kind of take you a kind of a very long-winded no, or kind of a silence. So this is why picking up the phone and speaking, having somebody that you know, an agent or a member of staff, somebody on the ground who can really suss out what that no means, and if it's a no now, if it's a no for the future, or if it is or if it or people are just kind of looking into it, then that's something that to definitely keep in mind for your relationships. So being flexible, being personable, but respecting boundaries and being formal, understanding what that a no might not be straightforward, and developing those relationships will take you a long way, I think, in working in Latin America and the Caribbean, and will also enable you to really enjoy, and for your business to flourish in this fantastic and dynamic market. And certainly, if you want to hear from the best and our pros, then as part of this series, our country directors from Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Peru, Central America and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, the English-speaking Caribbean, Chile and Mexico all produced short videos talking about their own markets, but each of them also took a business culture question, so you can listen to them, see their faces, see what they have to say. And I highly recommend having a look at those videos that are based on YouTube and are going to be in the same place where you will find the recording of this video. So that's kind of the business culture side of things. But I think mostly kind of when we get into kind of the more nitty-gritty and the technical, then certainly, you know, exporting and customs procedures are vital. So make sure that you do learn the rules and regulations of trading, and this is where Invest Northern Ireland and DIT, the chambers, can really help you out with that. But also on the gov.uk website, understanding the HSS codes is important. And as I've said, you know, establishing the best route to market for your products and services, whatever that may be, whether it's via a distributor, via an agent, or with you going there yourselves on the ground, do spend some time looking into that, because it is important. So as the next steps, what I'd really recommend that you do and take this away is do your homework. Do think about where you want to go in Latin America. It's a huge market, and maybe not necessarily Brazil and Mexico, which are the bigger markets, are the best step for you to get into. Think about the opportunities that I shared earlier. Where are your strengths? Who needs what you're looking for? Colombia and Peru could be the best start. If you're a small business, maybe thinking about the English-speaking Caribbean, because the regulation's similar, it's the same language, for cultural familiarity, a great place to start. Or if you're thinking that you need a regional hub or a base, so you want to enter one market, maybe Panama could be that. If you've got if you're in auto and advanced engineering, maybe Paraguay could be the best place for you. It's a huge market with lots of opportunities. So kind of take the time to think a bit more broadly about this, and use the connections that you're going to speak to and hear from today. Reach out to me and DIT, and of course contact Invest Northern Ireland, and please stay in touch. There's always things developing, and I've put on here some links. So if you look for Jo Krellin, who is Her Majesty's Trade Commissioner for Latin America and the Caribbean, you can follow her on LinkedIn and Twitter. For DIT, LATAC and Mexico, they have their own Twitter handles, and also Medium, which is a more kind of thought piece, thought leadership, longer article-based format than we have since there. But if you have any questions, and you have some general inquiries or some of the things we've talked about today and something more specific, then you can email the DIT Inquiry Hub, which is specific for Latin America and the Caribbean, and we can start you and point you in the right direction. We cover every market and we cover every sector, so please don't hesitate to contact us. So as I said, here's my details. Please reach out to me. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you. I'm going to be sitting in on a few of the one-to-one meetings as well, which I hope to see some of you at. And I'd just like to thank everyone today for participating, for being part of today's session. It's a real joy that we're able to reach out to you, and I look forward to seeing you all in Latin America and the Caribbean soon.